Just as the sun set behind the mountains, I peeled back a sliver in the curtains and peeked one-eyed out the frosted window. My gaze jumped between the woody shadows until I saw a Boston Terrier emerge darkly from the pines. He padded through the snow, cut a path directly to my house, and started scratching and whining at my door, just like he does every year. The night's just started, but it already feels like he's been doing it for days. It's driving me insane. But, like always, I have to ignore him, pretend I don't hear him, and pray for morning, when he will finally turn his tail and fade brightly into the morning light. Today marks the 20th anniversary since I first saw him. 20 years since Theodore died. As soon as church was finally over, I snatched my coat and mittens up off the pew and raced Theodore out the back door. Mom's warning to be careful tried to catch up with us as we kicked up the freshly fallen powder blanketing the Wyoming desert, until we arrived at the snow forts we'd painstakingly built the day before. Hiding behind my white wall, I extracted a couple of snowballs from my arsenal that I'd been smart enough to stockpile. I already knew my strategy. I'd spent all day thinking about it. Theodore had made these stupid turret things that, admittedly, looked pretty cool, but the problem was they weren't very stable. Even while he was building his fort, they kept falling down. And even though he'd finally gotten them all to stay up, their position on top of the wall was precarious at best. All it would take would be the slightest breeze, or say, a carefully aimed snowball to make them tumble down on top of the dummy sitting behind his far inferior wall. Snowballs in hand, it began. I peeked up from behind my fort and was greeted by a white blur whizzing past my head. Theodore had been waiting for me, but should have been prepared with more than one snowball and was now cowering behind his wall for safety. Little did he know. I took careful aim and threw my first snowball, which ever so slightly missed its mark and simply exploded into a shower of powder against the wall. Careful to throw harder and truer this time, I wound back and let loose with the second snowball. It stuck the turret, knocked it backwards off the wall, and created a satisfying cascade of snow. Even more satisfying, though, was the whiny, "Hey!" he licked from within the fort. He poked his head up, his blue cap now dusted with snow, pulled his arm back, and threatened, "You're a dead man now!" And he launched a giant snowball as hard as he could, and I ducked behind my fort. About a half hour went by when Theodore suddenly called out, "Hey, Dustin! Hey, Dustin, wait! Times!" "I don't trust you," I yelled back, safely crouched behind my wall. "No, seriously! I think there's something over there. Look!" "Nice try. I'm not stupid, unlike some people." "Seriously, there's something moving. Just look. I swear I don't have a snowball in my hands. I'm stepping away from my fort." I cautiously popped my head out, and sure enough, he was away from his fort with his hands in the air. Idiot. I grabbed a snowball and clocked him right in the face before he even had time to turn away. Pulling back his mittens to expose his fingers, he rubbed snow off his nose and said, "Dude, come on, cut it out. I'm being serious. Look." He pointed towards the trees, and at first I didn't see anything and thought this was probably some sort of trick to get me out in the open. But then I saw faint black movement against the snow. "Hey, I see it. It's right there." "What is it?" "I don't know," he responded. "Let's go take a look." The snow crunched beneath our feet as we made our way closer. The closer we got, the louder we could hear the whining coming from the movement. "It's a dog!" Theodore yelled. We got a little closer and started calling for it. "Here, boy! Come here, puppy!" With our calls, its ears perked up. It turned its head until its eyes briefly met ours. It gave the most pitiful, wet, and cold look you've ever seen. Snow had clumped up into balls in its fur, and it had snow covering up entire patches of its back. Its eyes were glistening, and its mouth downcast. It's panting a loud mixture of breathing and snorting. It eyed us suspiciously, and then jetted off in the opposite direction. We ran as fast as we could to try to catch it, calling out to it as we followed. I wasn't paying much attention to where we were going and didn't think anything of it. The steam rising from just ahead of us, right behind where the dog had stopped to rest, didn't even register. Theodore stopped dead in his tracks as I rushed past him. He called out to me. "Dustin, man, we shouldn't be here. We're out behind the hot springs." Thermopolis is a small Wyoming town. Is there really any other kind? Near the border of Yellowstone. It's primarily a tourist destination featuring the world's largest mineral hot spring. The hot springs themselves are safe to get in, but there are places in the surrounding desert where it's not safe, where the water is much hotter. Bubbling mud pits and boiling pools pepper the area. In a memorable object lesson, Mom showed us an elk skeleton lying in the bottom of one of the bubbling pools. She taught us not to go anywhere near the area because even the seemingly dry ground surrounding them can be dangerous because it could be nothing more than a mineral deposit shelf that could cave in under even slight weight. The elk carcass image now in my mind, he continued. "We've got to get out of here. It's just not safe." I looked at the dog shivering in front of me, just a few yards away. "Yeah, okay, but we're really close now. Just come stand where I am and I'll go around. The water is blocking him on the other side. I think we can catch him." Theodore was always kind of a pushover, but this time, he stared me down. "No, come on, man. You know we shouldn't be here." Exasperated. "Whatever, Theo. Don't be a baby. Just come and stand where I am now. You know it's okay right here, and I'll be on the other side just for a second. We won't be here long, I promise." He scrunched up his face in protest, but then sighed and shuffled to where I was standing. I maintained a respectable radius from the dog, trying not to spook him, as I circled around until I was finally on the opposite side of him. I called to Theodore. "Okay, I'm gonna try to make him go towards you. All you gotta do is grab him when he comes your way. He doesn't really have anywhere else to go." I spread my arms out and moved towards the dog, which made him finally run close enough for Theodore to grab. But he was going so fast that tackling him was about the only way to stop him, which is what Theodore tried to do. But it was really just a sideways fall, not so much a tackle, just enough to block the dog's progress with his body. But instead of a thump, Theodore's shoulder impacted the ground with a kind of deep, muted shatter. The ground beneath him turned into a spider's web cutting through the snow. The spider web suspended the dog and Theodore for just a moment until everything collapsed, and the scene in front of me erupted into a column of steam. A steam entirely composed of splashes and screams. Screams like you've never heard. Vocalizations created by nothing but pure pain. A pain that eclipses everything else entirely. The volume and discordance created must have made his vocal cords bleed under the strain. That is, until the scream became choked and gasping as Theodore's throat and lungs filled with boiling water. Theodore's screams stopped before the splashing did, and I found my own screams there to take the place of his. But soon, the splashing stopped completely, and the steam cloud began to clear to reveal Theodore's red and blistered body twirling deeper into the pool, his mouth still open and contorted. The dog had his tongue out and happily paddled on the water's surface. Teary-eyed, I threw screams and errant rocks at it, but didn't dare get closer. It remained non-pulsed as it exited the pool and shook itself off in a puff of steam. It turned its panting head, looked directly at me, and gave a single, triumphant bark. Then he turned towards the steaming wasteland, his tail wagging, and sauntered into the setting sun. As the night wears on, the scratching at the door grows more frantic and persistent. I had vowed that this year he wasn't going to break me, and I really meant it, like I do every year. But, like every year, as my thoughts turn to what else is hidden in the darkness, I can't help myself. I furtively pull back on the curtain and scan the tree line for what I know is out there. Yet, I still see nothing. I try not to give any attention to the dog, but my gaze betrays my resolve. As soon as I look at him, he stops all movement and sound, and he gives me the same triumphant look he gave me all those years ago. He holds the look until he slowly wags his tail and releases a single, happy bark. The instant he barks, I detect a faint light flare up amongst the darkness, and my eye immediately returns to the trees. In turn, the dog immediately resumes to his maddening post in office. Aided by the momentary flare, I can finally discern where they are, dimly visible against the trees. Theodore and my Miranda. They tried to tell me I couldn't have known, that it wasn't my fault. They tried to tell me that it would be okay, but I did know. It was my fault. They hadn't been there with us. I had remembered the elk carcass, but ignored it. Theodore wanted to stop, but I made him keep going. I made him jump to his death. It would never be okay. Not for me, and especially not for Theodore. But they kept telling me until I almost started to believe them. Even rocky shorelines eventually yield to persistent waves. There was even one entire day when I didn't think about Theodore. A happy day. It was the night of the happy day when the dog first revisited. I didn't see it approach that night, but I could feel the air grow heavy with foreboding. And when I looked out the window and saw a shape moving deliberately towards the house, I knew it was him. I knew it was the same dog. Once it arrived at the door, it started wailing and scratching. I ran into my parents' room and dove under the covers. They had been hugging each other really tightly and seemed frustrated that I had come in at all. They said they couldn't hear anything and to go back to bed right now for God's sakes. So I lay wide-eyed in bed, inexplicably shivering, even while deeply wrapped in blankets. I tried to place pillows over my ears to mute the constant sound, but that only made the puppy louder. Nothing I did could make it stop. Nothing I did could make it better. Nothing I did could bring back Theodore. I lay there sleepless all night, and the snow fell hard as the dog continued its accusatory howl. Then, in an instant, both the howling and the snowfall stopped as the horizon hinted at the first signs of morning. I stood up and looked out the window to watch the dog walk away. I walked toward a disturbance above the virgin snow. My throat closed as I realized it was Theodore, still screaming, his face silently screaming. He was still wearing his blue cap, which was pulled down so low that it nearly touched his eyes. His eyes, which released a single tear that fell independently of time. As the tear fell, the dog approached him. Once the dog reached Theodore, he turned and sat down facing me. The tear caught up with time and splashed on the dog's head, and they all erupted into a cloud of bright steam that was quickly swept away in the winter wind as the sun peeked over the horizon. That's when I knew that Theodore still blamed me. That's when I knew that everyone else was wrong. It really was all my fault. Theodore would never grow older. Theodore would never know happiness again. He would only know pain, screaming, and steam. It was all my fault. Theodore died because of me. At first, I was angry and tried to hurt myself, actively trying to somehow atone for what I'd done. It seemed the only way to make it better. I mostly tried burning myself, but I was always too weak and eventually pulled away. Each time, Bitter tears soothed and healed my wounds. But after an incident involving Dad's grill, my parents sent me to a hospital to get better. There was nothing there for me to burn. They locked me away from anything that could hurt the pain away. I had to find something else. That's where I found a better way than pain to cope. Coldness. If I couldn't give the dog and Theodore what they wanted, I could at least avoid that which I didn't deserve. True life. Emotion. I purposefully eschewed emotion of any kind. Happiness, sadness, excitement, longing, anger, anything. If I was simply cold to everything, I was numb. Numb, at least, no longer hurt. At least, I wasn't stealing something that was no longer mine to possess. The doctors were admittedly helpful, and even gave me blue pills that made me cold. When my parents walked me to the car from the hospital, the rain froze against my skin. From the moment I got home from the hospital, I always did exactly what I was told. I studied hard, got good grades, and participated in church activities as if I actually believed any of it. Aside from being reserved and mildly antisocial, I was ostensibly the perfect child. I figured that if I was always obedient, I couldn't hurt anyone else. That was the least I could do. I found that if I maintained distance from everyone and kept taking the pills, I could remain cold. And it was easy. Until I went to university and met Miranda. Mom wanted me to be a doctor, while Dad wanted me to be an engineer. So I matriculated in the school's biomedical engineering program to try to please them both. Miranda and I were enrolled in the same tissue regeneration course our junior year. While Miranda had been in some of my other classes, we'd never really spent any time together. I mean, I never really spent any time with anybody. But lab time was limited, so we were obligated to work with partners. Something I loathed. Miranda asked me, for some reason, if I wanted to be her partner. So I obliged because that was the polite and expected thing for me to do. One evening while we were in the lab, she knocked over the petri dish that we had been culturing for a few days. I thought it was kind of annoying that we'd have to start over, but was nothing to cry about. I, apparently, was the only one to hold this opinion about crying, because Miranda immediately burst into tears as soon as the glass hit and shattered on the ground. My self-regulated coldness really wasn't prepared for moments like these, because social decorum dictates expressions of sympathy, which was contrary to my cultivated nature. But I did the best I could to tell her that it was okay, that it wasn't a big deal. There wasn't much lost. We could start over again. We had plenty of time before the lab was due. She slumped on the ground and replied, "Oh, Dustin, it's not just the stupid petri dish. I'm nearly failing half my classes. I'm not cut out for the math, and I feel like an idiot next to people like you. You make it look so easy, and I struggle to do even the easiest things, like move a stupid petri dish." Tears streamed down her face and messed up her mascara. I think she was the only girl in our program to even bother with makeup anymore. But the smearing didn't do any favors to her aesthetic. Plus, my mom's sicker than ever. She's been fighting cancer for years now. We thought that it had all gone into remission, but she seized last month, and they found new tumors. They say that her prognosis is good, but with as much as these things keep popping up, I feel like it's only a matter of time. And what she wants most in the world is to see me graduate. And I don't think I can do it, Dustin. I just can't do it. She started sobbing again, so I sat on the sterile floor next to her, stretched my arms across her shoulders, and held her close. Because I guess that's what you're supposed to do in situations like this. She buried her head into my chest, and tears burned my skin. She burned so hot, and I could feel my insides slowly thaw. Borrowed heat pulsed from my heart into my extremities. My embrace turned from something robotic, programmed, mechanical, into something distinctly emotional and human. In that moment, I wanted to take all the hurt from her and put it into me. I didn't want her to have to burn with more tears. I pulled her closer, tighter. I kissed her forehead and stroked her hair, I told her those words that people always say but never really believe, but I meant them. It'll be okay. Everything's going to be okay, Miranda. I've got you. She looked up at me with wet eyes. Somehow, my opinion about the smeared mascara had changed in the last few minutes. She put her hand to my face and pulled my lips into hers. The ice that had frozen onto my skin that day I left the hospital shattered into a million pieces, and the shards evaporated before they even hit the floor. After we graduated, we found a duplex near the research lab in Austin where we'd both found work, and we finally moved in together. Those few months were the happiest of my life. They passed by in a blur of anticipation, laughter, and lovemaking. I rarely thought about Theodore. I had been so caught up with her and with work that the day of Theodore's anniversary passed without even crossing my mind. After I got home, and Miranda and I finally collapsed, mutually satisfied, on the bed, I started to drift off to sleep. Until the familiar foreboding found me. I didn't hear the dog, but, like always, I knew he was out there. I stood up from the bed, trying not to disturb Miranda, and I looked outside. Snow fell hard, and the city's lights were replaced by darkness. The only other movement was of a Boston Terrier, making its way to the door. I went back to bed and clutched onto my sweet Miranda. I wanted her to somehow make it all go away. She didn't move until the dog started scratching and whining at the door. She bolted up. "Dustin, what's that?" I held her tighter. "Wait, you can hear it?" "Why wouldn't I? It sounds like an animal or something." She tried getting up, but I held her firmly. "Miranda, please don't. I'm begging you, stay here." I pleaded and started crying. "Dustin, what is it?" "Please." I was shaking. She looked at me with those eyes. "Shh, it's okay." She cooed as she brushed my head like I had on the lab floor. "It's okay, Dustin. Shh." After a few minutes, I relaxed a little bit. She shifted in the bed. "I'm just going to get up and see what's going on really quick." And she stood up. I tried pleading with her to stay, but she was so concerned. She had such a warm heart. She loved so much. She cared so much. I tried to catch her before she opened the door, but I was too late. The dog ran inside, followed by a deluge of wind and snow. She started to chase after the dog, but I grabbed her hand and mustered up all my sincerity and pleading. "Please, Miranda, I'm going to ask you to trust me. I know I seem crazy, but please, just indulge me. We have to get out now. We have to get far away from that dog." She must have heard my fear and sincerity, or she just loved me because she looked at me, grabbed the car keys, and went barefoot and mostly naked into the ongoing winter storm. I hopped in the passenger seat while she took the wheel. I started to tell her about Theodore as we drove away. She never said a word the whole time. She just listened. When I told her how Theodore died, tears filled her eyes, and she said, "Dustin, I hope..." She slammed on the brakes and swerved to try to miss the dog crossing our path. Her scream filled the car as we began to roll. The world swirled together. I flew. Then everything was black. Black. Then light. Orange. So much orange. My eyes tried to regain focus, but my head pounded like a bass drum, making the whole world vibrate in rippling orange and black. Miranda. Everything shifted dramatically into focus. Smell, hearing, vision, and with them, smoke, screams, flames. I had been flung outside the car while Miranda was trapped inside, her ivory skin bubbling and searing into black as she screamed as loud as her smoke-filled lungs allowed. I futilely reached towards her, immobile, and her eyes, dancing orange, met mine for the last time. They tried to tell me something, but death interrupted her. as she collapsed further into the flames. Slowly, my limbs began to work again, and my tears extinguished the flames as I made my way towards her. I sat all night atop the twisted metal, clutching her smoldering remains as the snow swirled around us. The snow subsided as dawn approached. Before the light touched, the dog, Theodore, and Miranda, illuminated by the flames, emerged from the wreckage. A tear rolled down Miranda's cheek until it fell on top of the dog, and they all turned to smoke and blew away with the morning Texas wind. I still remember how her eyes looked dancing in the orange light. And even though I hold the memory perfectly, I don't know what she was trying to say. Sometimes, I hope that she was trying to offer me absolution. Like she was trying to tell me that it wasn't my fault. Not Theodore, not her, nothing. But now she's dead, and there's no one left to pardon me. Most of the time, though, I think it was blame. The way her eyes reflected the flames that ultimately extinguished her. These were the flames that I had made myself because I allowed myself to thaw. I stole heat I didn't deserve, that I didn't earn. I had no right to it, not after Theodore, and especially not now. Not anymore. Not after Miranda. They were my fault. All my fault. If I had just stayed cold. I was selfish to love her. If I had just... I stand back up, walk towards the window, and pull the curtain swiftly back, not caring if the dog sees me. They're easy to find this time. Theodore is still screaming, still steaming beneath a blue cap. Miranda, still beautiful, is silhouetted against a backdrop of flames, smoke rising from her bubbling skin. I try to understand her eyes, but I still can't. I wonder if I should just let the dog in and join them. But the door becomes silent. The dog has turned, and it's too late to let him in. Miranda and Theodore each shed a single timeless tear that fell as the dog approaches them. He reaches them, turns to me, and sits. The tears return to time and fall on his head. A morning sunbeam pierces and illuminates the mixture of smoke and steam until they disappear into wind. I sit back down, and my vision swims. I blink and shed 2 tears, one for Theodore, another for Miranda. They grow cold as they fall down my cheeks. They freeze before they hit the ground. I pick them up, pop them in my mouth, and swallow. They cool my insides as they go down. As the anesthesing coldness spreads, I pray this dose is enough to get me through another year.